access some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Hey, welcome to the program. My name is Chris Spangle. This is another in our series of the Path to Libertarianism. We're going to talk to our friend Ryan Lindsey about his path. He's got an interesting point of view that is different than a lot of libertarians you might hear, and you'll hear why as we go on. If you're coming from the left, then I think you'll really appreciate his point of view. So stick around and stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Warning, this show is for adults, produced by semi-adults. So the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to We Are Libertarians, where our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. We examine current events from a libertarian perspective while treating modern politics with all of the irreverence it deserves.
There has been lie after lie.
We toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, a 15-year veteran of politics and media, Chris Spangle.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the program. As you heard that dulcet-toned man say, my name is Chris Spangle, and welcome to the program. Welcome to We Are Libertarians. So nice to have you here, especially with these Path episodes. I know that is a lot of new people, so if you're new to libertarianism or you're just checking us out, trying to take us for a test drive before the presidential year, then we welcome you and say hello, and we hope that we won't disappoint you too much. We're going to disappoint you. It's only a matter of time. The person that I am talking to today is the editor and the founder of WAL Reader, WAL Reader, which you can find on Amazon. Just go in and type in WAL Reader or go to walreader.com. And that is, would you call it our magazine, Ryan?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, We Are Libertarians is your network, so if you want to call it that,
I would say an intellectual journal, magazine, whatever you want. It's sort of like WAL itself. It's whatever the person wants to adapt it to be. Are we professional? Yes. Are we not professional? Absolutely. So we're all things to all people sometimes. So definitely check that out. It's absolutely great. I'll tell you, Ryan, the first time that I got the printed version in the mail, and I always buy like 5 or 6 of them for posterity's sake and maybe giveaways in the future, but also because I love it. When I got the first one, you'd kind of been working on it. You'd been putting stuff together. I'd kind of breezed through some of the articles. Like my thing as an editor-in-chief of all things WAL Network is that I really say, all right, you want to use the platform? Cool, do your thing. And I think I told you no for the first time when you asked to have that nut job that wrote that stupid Vermin Supreme article, Joe Papadopoulos or whatever. You were kidding, but I said
definitely.
No. But I got it, and I was just super impressed with it, and I think it's such a cool idea. And there was an article in the first one about what is a libertarian socialist, and it caused so much controversy and people yelling at me, going, "How could you have such an article in a libertarian magazine?" And I said, I don't care. I really try to just let people do their shows and get out of their way.
Yeah, and the funny thing about that article is it got so much criticism, but not once. Everybody that challenged it, or not everybody, obviously, but whenever I saw people saying like, "Oh, this isn't libertarian" or whatever, all I did would challenge them, like find one instance in that article where the author was suggesting that force should be initiated against anyone, and nobody ever could, because Kenton, the author of that, that's not what he was doing. It was a critique of capitalism, not a call for government force against people.
And I imagine that you did what I did, which is, hey, if you'd like to write a rebuttal for the second issue, go ahead. Did you ever receive one submission?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
There
not
you
a
go.
single one.
Right. And so tell us a little bit about WAL Reader. What exactly is it?
Yeah. So it is a journal, a magazine that I put together with several other people from the WAL network. Hody Johns has been a ton of help with it as far as recruiting people and writing for it and everything. And it's basically just, every few months I try to put a issue out, and we just write about. So far, each issue has kind of had a certain theme. Like the first one was, what does libertarianism mean to you? How did you get here, etc. Then the second one was all about immigration, different libertarian stances on immigration. And then this most recent one was sort of, we tried to have a more positive look at, America and even the American government, some of the stuff that has improved over the past couple centuries or is still getting better. But the cornerstone of each article is really trying to portray a diversity of thought that necessarily isn't going to be extremely common in mainstream political thinking or even libertarian thought, and just trying to not have an echo chamber. Like you said in the first article, there was something about libertarian socialism, but there was also a lot of articles that were like praising capitalism and people talking about like their love for free markets being why they became libertarians. The second issue, that had a ton of opposing opinions in it, but nothing that I would say was, none of them were not libertarian. You had people saying we need pretty strict immigration controls, some people saying that no, open borders are the way to go, and they're all libertarians. So I just tried to collect those thoughts all in one place and present them all to the readers.
So why did you decide to start it, and how did you get going? I mean, what is your operating philosophy too? I mean, so why did you start it, and what was the impetus? Like, what was the force of it?
Yeah, so I guess I started it just, I've always been a really big fan of print journalism. I know that's old school in this age, but I've just, magazines, like I read Reason and The Atlantic, those every month whenever I get those, it's like Christmas 12 times a year for me. So like I've always really enjoyed, and I grew up like all through middle school reading the you'll appreciate this, but the Limbaugh letter.
Mm-hmm.
My grandpa subscribed to it, and he'd always give those issues to me when he was done with them. So
I subscribed for a period of time, which is why I have a Rush Limbaugh mouse pad in my office, and I got the Glenn Beck magazine. I always thought Fusion and the Limbaugh letter, I always thought that was like a cool add-on to the radio show. So like it was thrilling for me when you said that you wanted to do this, because it echoes back to that. But I too, I watched All the President's Men when I was like 13, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to do journalism. And it morphed into whatever this is. But, I was I don't know if you've read Working by Robert Caro. You would go crazy for it. But, that's interesting. So this is sort of an output of those early dreams.
Yeah. I've like you said, I've always been like interested in journalism. Like I love the idea of journalism as an institution. I think it's really important. And I love writing. Writing's always been one of my like favorite hobbies and pastimes and all. And I do a way different kind of writing, but professionally as my career. And so, and I'm a big fan of the We Are Libertarians network and the show you've put together. And so, whenever I was listening to the episode, I guess about a little over a year ago at this point, where you pretty much just put out an open call, like, if you want to contribute to the network, like, let me know and I'll find a way to let you. And so I was kind of like, well, I have always wanted to, in the back of my mind, one of those ideas like, oh, it'd be cool to have like my own journal or magazine. And then you put out that call. So I'm like, why not? Let's see what he thinks. And like, I didn't really have a terribly high hopes for the first issue. I didn't think, it's like, I've never done this before. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
If I can be honest with you, neither did I, because I was like, a lot of people will say to me, hey, I want to do this. And I go, okay. And then I never hear from them again, or they never produce. Right. They never actually ship the product. And you've been, like you're like, oh, I'm so sorry this third one got out late. I'm like, I'm happy there's a third one. So I was my thing is like, all right, go ahead. I mean, I think, what was my response to you when you were like, I have this idea? Was I amenable? Was I polite? I don't remember.
Oh yeah, you were polite. Like, you weren't just like, oh yes, like do it now. But I mean, you were just like, okay, yeah, like let me know whenever you have something put together. And
Cool. Yeah.
so I really had no idea how it's going to turn out, and I'm super happy with how all 3 issues have turned out so far. I know that's kind of tooting my own horn, but I think all the authors who have contributed have wrote some really interesting content, and I've definitely learned a lot about graphic design and formatting and all as I'm putting everything together. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really well done, and I really, really appreciate that you do it, and I really think it's such a great compliment, and I think it's one of the I think it's because it's so new and we don't talk enough about it that it's sort of the unsung jewel of the libertarian, the WAL empire here. And so I just appreciate your time and effort that you put into it because I'm proud of it. It definitely reaches the quality that I want us to hit. And like, you're going to evolve it. You're going to grow it. It's just like doing a podcast where you start. You just have to start. You just have to keep moving. And over time, like, you'll look back at that first issue 5 years from now and go, oh my God. But that's super important. I think when you're creating content is just start and evolve it over time. And the curtains behind me are waving because of mittens. So yeah, please go to WAL Reader. You can read the stuff online too at walreader.com or at wearelibertarians.com. I need the third export, by the way. So
I'll send that to you.
and then I'll put that up on WAL too and put that out through our distribution network. But yeah, but we really want you to go and get them on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle. And is there a third print edition coming?
Still working on that. I'm not gonna bash Amazon because the publishing, they take their cut from it, but it's all for free. I just send them the files and they ship out physical copies when people order. But they are not the easiest to work with at the same time. So
okay. All right.
But it's in progress.
Yeah, I think as we go on and grow, I mean, if you figure something else out, yeah. But I love the print version myself. I just think it's so cool to get that in the mail and see it, and I'm very proud of what you've put together. And if people want to contribute and write, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they can obviously anybody who listens to the show knows like your email. So like I'm sure you could direct people to me, but we have our own email set up. It's just thewalreader@gmail.com. You can email us there. We have a page on the website, walreader.com, where people can submit ideas or stuff or get a hold of us there. We have a Facebook page, just WAL Reader. You can message us.
Instagram.
So Instagram, yeah. There is a Twitter, but I'm a boomer with Twitter and don't know how to use it hardly. So I don't think I've posted on the Twitter in several months, which I should get better about that.
We can just set up an auto tweeter from your WordPress to Twitter, and that can be what it is.
I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, we'll jump on a Zoom and do a screen share. But it is, Twitter is one of those things where, like, for a brand like that, it's just publish so people see the update. There's and I'll give you the WAL Twitter too if you ever want to get on there too. But
okay.
All right. Well, very good. So let's start with your past. Let's start with kind of where you began. Did you grow up in a political household? Did you grow up into politics? I mean, you said you were really into journalism, but did that extend to politics? Like, what kind of ideology were you swimming in as a Ute, as Russ would say?
Yeah, well, so like I said, I grew up like middle school, reading the Limbaugh letter. So it was and like my dad, listened to like our local Fox Talk radio station. He listened to that quite a bit. And so it was a pretty political household, like, and obviously in the conservative sense. Like I remember, this is bad. I don't know why I'm saying this, but I was in fourth grade during the 2004 election, and I got in trouble for cutting a picture of John Kerry out of the newspaper and taping it to the bottom of my shoe.
Now, listen, school. I was in college and I got in trouble for the same thing, so it's okay.
So yeah, like I didn't really know. I just knew like, oh, these are who my parents like, so I like them too, and this is what they think, so that's what I think. Yeah, like I think being awareness of current events has always kind of been something in my life, and also history. I've always been a big fan of history books and documentaries and stuff. And I think a lot of that also goes back to my grandpa. He was a World War II veteran. So he was always down to, and his mind was like a steel vault. So he was always down to talk about, all the stuff that he grew up through. And I mean, if you really get into the weeds of history, like history and politics are pretty inseparable, really. So. Oh,
I totally agree. I think politics, religion, rhetoric, philosophy, history, it's just all intertwined. I mean, the liberal arts are the liberal arts for a reason. They're all one big pot. And I think that's one reason that I really like what you add to the network, is because you, like Vaughn, like Reinhold, like a lot of us, we're all history fans, we're all philosophy fans, we're all religious in our own ways, and understand that that's all sort of one stream. That's sort of one stream of history, human thought, and it's a big thing that I love here at WAL, is like I really want to connect history with the present. So, when did you start to go, all right, I may not be a conservative Republican like my parents?
Yeah. So that was really in high school, in probably about junior year of high school. I'd grown up in church and everything, but around junior year was whenever I started really taking, I guess, my faith more seriously, or trying to make it more than just, oh, this is somewhere I go on, Sundays and Wednesdays sometimes. And whenever I started doing that, it was just sort of like a lot of the like tenets of my conservative beliefs, like I was all about like strict borders and fully supportive of the war on drugs and, like all the foreign wars and everything. And it just kind of, once I started taking my faith more seriously, it was kind of like, well, these two are in conflict, because Jesus is telling me to love my enemies, and I'm over here cheering on, carpet bombing Iraq. So it's like something had to give. And gradually, piece by piece, it was my conservative beliefs that kind of got replaced by my Christian beliefs. I think probably the first thing to go was the war on drugs. I was kind of like, you're like, yeah, they don't need to be locked up. Maybe just pay a fine, and then gradually, now I'm like, legalize heroin. But
it always like, for me, when I was hired at the Libertarian Party of Indiana in 2009, I'm like, I don't know about all these guns, and like, I don't know about all that. Like, I don't know that anybody needs a gun. And then, but now I'm like, I don't know why anybody wouldn't want a tank.
Now you're a boogaloo.
Yeah, no, I'm not that far. I'm no pacifist like yourself, which we'll get into. Don't let me forget, because I want to talk about that. But okay. I'm definitely not like, these Instagram kids are scary. So let's talk about your Christian faith. I mean, how would you define it? What are some of the central tenets of your Christian faith that you really find like, this is the part that's most meaningful to me, that informs my political thought?
Yeah. So I guess, in a sense, you could say my entire political philosophy is summed up in 3 words: Jesus is Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, that inherently means that Caesar or a president or Congress isn't. And so like, I'm trying to think. For example, how I mentioned earlier, Jesus says, love your enemies. And Jesus says, take care of the poor people. And Jesus says, welcome the stranger, and, all this stuff. And I think, unfortunately, that especially Western Christianity has a tendency to spiritualize a lot of the teachings of Jesus. We take this Sermon on the Mount, and instead of like this revolutionary political and religious sermon, we turn this into, well, this is just a bunch of like life lessons we're supposed to imply internally on an individual level. And I think there is some truth to that, but at the same time, loving your enemies and all the other teachings of Jesus have to have outward social implications. It can't just mean, like, oh, I'm really praying that, while I'm cheering on Iraq being bombed, I'm really praying for those Iraqi souls. I hope they get saved. It's like, no, those two, that doesn't work.
Which is a lot of what Martin Luther King in his Vietnam speech spoke about. I mean, that sort of articulates the angle of how can you be a Christian and support war at the same time, which ultimately killed his career. And I mean, it really did end Martin Luther King Jr.'s career because he was anti-war during a war. Mm-hmm. And how can you? I mean, sounds in a lot of ways like, and just from knowing you and talking to you, that you do have a lot of the same kind of beliefs as Martin Luther King Jr. Where, listen, the capitalist system is harmful to a person's soul. Social justice is incredibly important. We need to lift the poor up. You don't want to use government programs like he did, but that seems to be a motivating factor. I mean, is that a fair comparison? I'm not calling you Martin Luther King Jr., but I'm saying, like, as I have studied him, your beliefs kind of sound parallel to his.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I take that as a compliment. Maybe probably an undeserved compliment, but
should be.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison.
So, in terms of your Christian beliefs, like, are you a part of a denomination, or what sort of vein are you in?
Yeah, so I grew up.
If you're watching
Southern
the video,
Baptist.
I would say Mennonite.
Mennonite. Oh, yeah.
You look a little bit like Jesus, to be honest.
Oh, thank you. Like the white Jesus. That's all the paintings.
So you started Southern Baptist?
Yeah, and I went to a Southern Baptist church until shortly after the 2016 election, and then just kind of faded out of that. And then for about a year, my wife and I have been going to a Disciples of Christ church. Mm-hmm. They're a smaller denomination, and they're a pretty decentralized denomination. It's pretty much, they have like all the churches that are part of that. It's like they have a few very key tenet beliefs, but other than that, it's just kind of like they all do their own things. The one we go to is definitely like a more progressive church, I'd say, of the denomination. But
so I've seen you talk a lot about Eastern versus Western and Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox. Like, what is that about? Because I barely, I'm busy, so I peruse the chat occasionally. But explain your thoughts about that.
Well, so first off, a lot of my picking on Eastern Orthodox and high church Catholicism is just to get at Dale Melcham.
Okay,
but no, but I think. Well, how I was talking about a few minutes ago about how so many churches tend to over spiritualize the teachings of the Bible and forsake like the social implications of those same teachings. I think a lot of that is from the way that Western Christians, and especially American Christians, read the Bible and view the Bible, because really, Christianity is an Eastern faith. It started in the Middle East, and so I guess it's a Mideast faith more than an Eastern faith. But you can't take it. I think if you take the Bible out of the context of the culture and the world that it was written in, you lose a lot of its meaning. Like, for example, Jubilee in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus' very first public sermon, he's calling for a year of Jubilee. And in our Western readings of that, we read that and it was like, oh, Jubilee, that's joy, happiness. Like Jesus is, calling for joy, peace, and happiness. But then you look in that cultural context of what a year of Jubilee meant in that time. And he's talking about, land redistribution, debt forgiveness, all this stuff that just gets lost whenever you don't view it through the lens of the culture it was written in. And I think, obviously, I think Christianity is a very social oriented faith, a very communal faith. And I think it's pretty clear in not just religious aspects, but in almost all aspects, there's a pretty clear divide between East and West of, hyper individualism and then more social community based lifestyles. And
well, yeah, you see that played out in the book of Acts, where They share everything, and when somebody tries to keep some for themselves, they're basically zapped to death. They have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Who are the two? Who's the couple that they keep?
Ananias and Sapphira.
It's Sapphira, and they essentially, the story is the early Christian church had moved sort of outside of Jerusalem, had set up camp outside of town, and everyone had sold everything, put it into a common pot, invited anyone and everyone in. Everyone was equal. And Ananias and Sapphira had sold a lot of land. They were fairly wealthy, and they had kept a portion of that for themselves. They had hidden in their tent some wealth, and when it was found out, Peter rebukes them, and they both end up dying like on the spot in a heart attack. There's a great series that follows the book of Acts kind of closely that is a really good illustration of it, and it's by the people who made the Bible series. I'm totally skipping on the name of the series, but it's on Netflix.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Email me if you're interested, but if you look up, just put in Bible in the search and you'll see it, and it's like 80 or Acts or something. I don't know. It's really good. And that scene particularly is a little disturbing, but it kind of gives a visual to it. So, yeah, I think in terms of the development of Christianity from the 30s on, but specifically in the 50s after the Cold War and the rise of Billy Graham, who I'm a Christian because of Billy Graham. I revere him. I think he's a great man, but the early evangelical movement that he really helped to solidify was very anti-communist and helped in a lot of ways in trying to reinforce the idea that America is good, the American government is good, and that the Soviet government is evil. They're godless and evil, and we are God-fearing and good. And that gave license to a lot of behavior by the American government over the last 70, 80 years, and Christians tacitly just going, yeah, if you're a good Christian. I mean, who was the pastor that just said, I think it was Jim Baker that said, supporting Trump is a test of your ability to get into heaven.
Yeah.
And that's that's the end result of kind of that merging of the American government and Christian thought as a power base. And within a lot of that is the individual ethic and the idea. I just saw David Brooks wrote an article in, I think, The Atlantic about how
the nuclear family.
The nuclear family is basically because of our individualistic outlook, and we've taken it too far. And so from Victoria times on, in conjunction with the perversion of evangelical, I'm an evangelical, but I agree with you that we have gone too far in turning our faith into an individualistic exercise and not applying it to our community. But you look at how that idea of individualism, which is a foundational principle of libertarianism, so this is a sticky conversation. Yes, individual rights are incredibly important, but at the same time, we don't exist in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. Our families are weaker when we have killed off extended family and really just tried to focus on just mom and dad carry all the burden of the family. I think our churches are weaker because we've killed off the idea that we just outsource all the care for the poor to the government, compared to 100 years ago when mutual aid societies. I mean, here in Indianapolis, we have Methodist Hospital, or you have Southern Methodist University, or you have the Children's Methodist Home. And I grew up a Methodist, and social action was an enormous part of the Methodist movement. And they built a lot of great institutions, private institutions that cared for the poor, that cared for everyone. And churches were a vehicle for funding a lot of social action. That seems to have completely ended. I think there is a movement within the modern evangelical church to get back to that. I see churches like Matt Chandler in the Village Church, for instance, is actively shrinking the size of their megachurch. They're the fastest shrinking church in the United States because he's saying this megachurch thing is bad for the soul, and we need to think about caring for each other in a community and not caring for ourselves, which that 90s boomer church mentality of, you need to focus on your personal success in order to be a good Christian. The prayer, you're too young to remember the prayer of Jabez, but that was the hot book in the late 90s, early 2000s, where somebody wrote this book about Jabez praying to expand his wealth and increase his lands. And it was the biggest selling book of the year, and every church was doing a series on personal wealth and praying for. I mean, it was.
That's just abhorrent to me.
If you look up the prayer of Jabez, I think you'd freak out. So I think you have a fair criticism of the Christian church and of our society at large in that we have allowed individualism become harmful to the idea of community. And we're seeing the fruits in the Trump era of that sort of mentality.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair to say. Yeah, I think so much of the Trump era and, the rise of people like Trump and, Bernie Sanders, I'd say too, is caused by just this massive sense of anxiety and like people have no idea where they fall in the social order and they feel like, they're just watching their communities fall around them and they don't know anybody and like nobody has, like as many friends as they used to and stuff like that. And I think that like these populist movements, whether they're, right or left, are definitely a symptom of that.
Yeah. I think Ben Sass's book, I don't know if you've read Them by Ben Sass, but
haven't, no.
No, I think you'd enjoy it, even though he's a Republican, Ryan. It really is a great book on identifying why we have the rise of the kind of politics that we do, and a lot of it goes back to the de-evolution of. I mean, listen, if you're, I've said it on this show a million times, like if you're 30 years old and you move to a new city and you don't know anybody there, and you're not religious, so you're not going to go to a church, and you're not necessarily political, so you're not going to join a campaign, how do you make friends? How do you meet anybody?
No idea.
Yeah, like really, like do you know? I don't know, how old are you?
24.
All right, 24. So, you have college that can be a social vehicle, but if you're 30 and you're way out of college, like I don't know how people. I have friends who are just like, do you want to hang out? I haven't hung out with anybody in 3 months.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a friend in 3 months, like. And I just go, I don't know, man. I feel bad for you. Yeah, that breakdown of the social fabric. So how do we as libertarians start to kind of heal that and help people find community and escape tribalism?
Yeah, so I think I don't know if the first, but one of the biggest things that libertarians as a group or a movement, whatever you want to define it as, needs to do is just the total rejection of brutalism. I think brutalism, like libertarian brutalism, is just the most antisocial, sociopathic ideology out there. Just social Darwinism to the extreme. And I think that is something, if libertarians want to actually play a serious part in mending like the moral or social fiber of our communities or our country or the world, we've got to get over this idea of, I'm here to take care of myself. I'm going to do whatever I need to better myself. And if you get left in the dust, then that's your fault and entirely that's on you.
Well, we had a conversation sort of similar in a recent episode with Adam on the path to libertarianism, where he asked what responsibility people in positions of privilege have. I mean, so how would you answer that? Like, you and I are white men, and that does carry some level of privilege. But as Americans, I mean, as a society, we're incredibly wealthy. As middle-class people, we're incredibly wealthy. It's not just about identities. It's also just about the place you're born,
Yeah.
I mean, how do you view a person's responsibility to help people who might not have access to networks of power?
Yeah. So I guess two quick disclaimers here. One, I don't want to be called a hypocrite, so I realize that I'm pointing out the speck in other people's eyes and ignoring the log in my own. And two, the second disclaimer, I forgot what that one was. I'm sure it'll come up. But Oh yeah, second disclaimer. I'm talking now about moral responsibility, not necessarily legal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind. But I would say that if I think it is immoral that you have, and I'm just going to go for the low-hanging fruit, but you have people like Jeff Bezos who have more money than they could possibly ever spend, or Bill Gates, or whoever, Bloomberg, unimaginable amounts of money, and at the same time, people like literally starving on the streets in some cases. I know that's not that common in America, but it does happen. Or, at the same time, I could apply that to myself. I probably should a lot more than I do, and say, well, I have, an extra bedroom in my home, and there's people like half a mile away sleeping under the interstate bridge. And I think that is so I think we have a moral responsibility to help as much as possible, I guess.
But let's take the billionaire example. Like, Jeff Bezos' wealth is not just sitting in a money market account waiting to be spent. I mean, Jeff Bezos' wealth is in basically in stock and invested in a company. So it's not like that's liquid assets that he can, and that's sort of where I think this critique breaks down, is like, I'm not saying that you don't understand his wealth, but it seems like an easy, like you said, you admitted it's low-hanging fruit, but I think Bezos has the ability, specifically, let's take Bill Gates, because there's a documentary on Netflix called Inside Bill's Brain that kind of walks through Bill Gates, and he's a highly controversial figure to a lot of different people in a lot of different groups, and anti-vaxxers and all that. But here's a person who started something in a garage, built a tremendous amount of wealth in a company, and then has over time begun liquidating his investment and asset to then pour that into a charity, and has persuaded other billionaires like Warren Buffett, to do the same, to liquidate their billions and start actively. I mean, Bill Gates has funded the toilet that basically creates heat out of flushing your toilet for poor areas in Africa, and they're actively working on problems of extreme poverty, of disease, of the coronavirus. I mean, because Bill Gates lives in a capitalistic system, he has the ability to then turn his wealth into something that he can spend $147 million on fighting the coronavirus. I mean, so do you not see that disconnect where, yeah, it looks easy, it's an easy critique that it's unfair that guy has all that wealth, but Bill Gates is a great example of somebody who recognizes his responsibility.
Yeah, and as soon as you said Bill Gates, I regretted using him as an example for because then I was like, oh yeah, all that stuff he does. But okay, so Bill Gates wasn't a great person to use. But I think even then, I think there is.
Well, let me just argue back. Like, the Plainfield Library that I grew up learning so much from was a Carnegie library initially. If you look at the robber barons, which are so abused from the left side, these are people who really funded a lot of the early institutions that now continue to help people. I mean, people who amass tremendous amounts of wealth, I think, do get to a point where they start to go, man, I really got to do something. I think they're the people that fund, as I do Leaders and Legends, a podcast here, and talk to charities. The people who are funding all of these nonprofits and charities that I'm talking to are the people that live in Indianapolis and have a tremendous amount of wealth. I think it is sort of an unfair criticism a lot of times to say that because someone has a lot of money, they just hoard it to themselves. I mean, am I being unfair to you? Am I being unfair to your point of view?
No, yeah, I agree. So you've brought up a few things. So like with Bezos, the illiquidity of a lot of his assets, it's not like he's just sitting at home surrounded by stacks of $100 bills and choosing.
He's not Donald Duck, or what was Scrooge McDuck where he opens the vault? Yeah.
So that's fair, and that's important to keep in mind. Or like Bill Gates, like he accumulated all this wealth and now he is spending it in ways that he thinks are or in really great ways, and he's trying to be responsible in how he does that and all. And I think that's good. But especially with the robber barons like Carnegie and Rockefeller and some of those others, they did fund some really great things like libraries and concert halls and arts and stuff. But I don't think you can look at them and not look at how they accumulated a lot of that wealth. How much of, especially the robber barons, I'd say, how much of that wealth were they able to accumulate because they bought off a bunch of Congress people and got them to sell them all this land for their railroads, or or how many times did they use the federal army to break up a strike, or, things like that. And so I think there's...
Or the modern critique of Bezos and Amazon and its treatment of its workers.
Yeah, well, I think that's excellent, really important to bring up too. Like, a lot of Amazon workers work in just terrible, awful conditions. Like, I've heard multiple stories, about women having miscarriages because their managers wouldn't let them sit down for 5 minutes in these warehouses and stuff. And so it's like, I whenever I look at all the money Bezos has and how much money like Amazon is worth, I can't, in my head, like, I can't separate that from like how terrible some of these workers are treated.
Sure. And I think people like yourself who make these critiques and support outlets that make these critiques have pushed people like Apple to go, all right, let's rethink our position with Foxconn. Let's start moving things back to California. Let's spend some of our wealth to not enslave third world people.
Right. Yeah. And that's, well, okay. And I want to talk about the third world, like factories and all, because I used to be a big proponent, and pusher of the idea that, people are working in these sweatshops for, like 20 cents a day, but it's better than the alternative of working in an even more dangerous, farming environment making 5 cents a day. And it's like, well, yeah, it's true. Like, that's a better alternative, but like, it's like, that doesn't mean it's a good alternative. It doesn't mean that that's what like those companies with those sweatshops should be doing.
Yeah. So you sound a lot like AOC.
Oh, man, I wasn't even going to bring her up because I know that you hate talking about her so much.
Well, here's my thing with her. Okay, my thing, and I was having this very argument, as I do almost every day with Reinhold, because Reinhold is so fixated on how awful Trump is, he misses how awful Bernie is. And it's not that he's wrong, but the fact that people are so critical and have been so critical of Donald Trump, it helps fuel the people that support Donald Trump. It helps give him rise. And so my thing with AOC is, by constantly mocking her, by constantly, making memes about how dumb she is, or constantly like posting about her like Ben Shapiro does, he can't miss an opportunity to make her look foolish or criticize her. And, then he gives the caveat of, I'm not trying to make her important, but she's relevant, so I've got to talk about her. It's like, dude, you're making her relevant on your side. And so it's like, I don't think libertarians learned from the Trump phenomenon the two lessons of the Trump phenomenon, which is, if you're constantly bashing somebody, you're going to promote them, and their bad ideas will be spread further. And secondly, I think you do a disservice to the people that have an affinity for that particular person. And so, while I am critical of Trump and I am critical of AOC, you don't see me post a lot about that on social media, for instance, because it's hard to have the right context. And the people that I might want to be libertarians in 3 to 10 years are going to remember that they're going to tune me out. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to hear what I have to say. They're not going to tune into We Are Libertarians, where they can hear more thoughtful critiques of those particular people. So I'm not against criticizing her or praising her when she's right, or even against talking about her. I just think that it can go too far, and it can be too mean, and it can have the opposite effect of what people are often trying to do, which just gives her more power. And I don't believe that she's a person that deserves to have power. I think that this is an argument that you and I have. I think that AOC, Bernie Sanders, they're people that, if given power, don't understand the limits of power. They believe that job of president or congressperson gives them unlimited power. They're ideologues in the way that Woodrow Wilson was, or FDR, and look at how further they push the American system towards away from liberty and towards more authoritarianism. And so I think if Bernie Sanders gets elected president, I think there's no doubt that person will use the executive orders and the more authoritarian aspects of his office to push us more towards. He's just another swing of the Trump pendulum, but on the opposite side. And I think in some ways Bloomberg is that way too. I think if you look at Bloomberg's time as mayor, he was incredibly authoritarian.
Horrifying.
Yeah. And so Reinhold was arguing we've got to get Trump out because he's doing immeasurable damage. We may not survive as a republic, so even Bernie Sanders would be better. And I'm like, on what fucking planet are you living? You know what I mean? Like, and it's unfair for me to. We'll argue about this on a future episode, so he can have his future combat. But like my problem with AOC is that I think she has no limits on how much power she thinks she should have, and I think that is a particularly damaging person. So even if she says things like about criminal justice reform that libertarians like, and maybe there's some opportunities to work with that person, she doesn't believe what we believe at all. And it's the same with Tulsi Gabbard. Like, Tulsi Gabbard or Andrew Yang say things that we like, but that doesn't mean that if they're in the presidency or have more power that they're going to start doing libertarian things overall. So that's my critique of her. Yeah. I mean, where am I going wrong? Because I know you have an I Heart AOC poster on your wall, right?
No, but my wife does.
I think you also like to post about AOC in the group because it pisses people like John Ulrich off and it makes you laugh. You're a low-key shit poster. Admit it.
Yeah, low-key. Yeah, so, okay. So I guess AOC. So I agree. I don't think I would not say that she is a libertarian. But I would say that she is, with the exception of Justin Amash, probably the most libertarian person in Congress, because the issues that she's good on, she is very, very, very good on, in my opinion. And there's quite a few of those, I think.
Like what?
Immigration. I can't think of a more libertarian person in D.C. on immigration than AOC. Criminal justice reform, foreign policy. She is definitely one of the more dovish people in foreign policy issues. I mean, she's kind of heavy-handed on foreign aid and all, but everybody is. So I'm not going to hold that against her any more than I would against anybody else. Let's see, what else? Corporatism, crony capitalism. She's great at pointing out issues there and trying to deal with those. And I say trying to deal with those because, I mean, a lot of her proposed solutions do involve bigger government and all. But so I think she goes off the rails on her solutions, but I think she points out a lot of issues that I don't really see many other people doing. And so I think whenever like 90% of libertarians are in that camp of, screeching about how AOC is just the dumbest person ever and the devil and like Stalin reincarnate, I think, I feel like I have to balance that out by pointing out, like, actually, like, have you seen her stance on all these other issues? And I think she's somebody that, like, I don't know why she's not invited to, like LibertyCon to talk about immigration or criminal justice. Like, they'll invite Thomas Massey, but not AOC, and that doesn't make sense.
But I think it's because her solutions are she wants to use government force to rectify all those problems, and that is the breakdown for people like me, where I look at people like you and go, don't you see that the difference between Thomas Massey is that Thomas Massey is not willing to use force, or is at least trying to mitigate the use of force, whereas AOC uses it gleefully. And that is the breakdown between her and us.
in some things, like going back to immigration, I don't really think she's wanting to use government force to address that. I mean, she's pretty much an open borders advocate at this point.
Right, which is a fair critique. So on the things that we care about, she's trying to remove the government from those areas.
Yeah, or, crony capitalism. She's all about, rooting out these corrupt contracts with, a lot of the military industrial complex and like big pharma companies and all. I think that's important. And Thomas Massey, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, yeah, he's all about lessening government force, but at the same time, he's a pretty big proponent of the border wall and more border restrictions. He's been in favor of several issues surrounding LGBT people and all that I would say lean more towards the authoritarian side of the scale. So they all have their faults. I just think AOC's faults are way over magnified, and the positives of her are just completely ignored most of the time.
Okay, that's fair. So let me help you save your libertarian credentials. And I'm surprised we're getting this so late. That's my apologies as a host. But like, when did you decide to apply the word libertarian to yourself?
Man, I think I started using that term to describe myself probably shortly after the 2012 election. I wasn't old enough to vote in that one. But afterwards, I had this friend in high school, and he was all talking about like, man, this sucks. He's like, Obama and Romney are just trash. And he's like, have you heard of Ron Paul? And I'm like, no. And so and I don't know I think I'd heard of him, but I never really like listened to him or anything. And he sent me all these like YouTube links, and I started watching. And it's like, yeah, like I agree. Like, because even then when I was definitely, I would say, more of a statist progressive type than a libertarian. It's like, oh yeah, he's solid on civil liberties and, foreign policy and all this stuff. So it's like, I definitely think I started applying that term. Like, yeah, I'm like libertarian on these issues. Full-fledged, just like, oh, I'm a libertarian. That was probably, that came along really, I'd say, with whenever the Black Lives Matter movement really started up, like 2014, I think, just because that was really showing me all those instances of police violence, like, oh, this is what supporting like some of these like progressive laws results in. You can't have like the nice, dreamy progressive laws without the police out there enforcing them also. And so that made me realize that it's like, nah, I've got to get rid of the state force part of my beliefs.
Right. And so in the libertarian movement, there's a lot of people who go, oh, this person became a libertarian because of Black Lives Matter. They're not a real libertarian. They're just closet liberals. There's a lot of people trying to I'm blanking on the senator. There's a lot of McCarthyism going on in the libertarian movement right now against people like yourself, which I feel is unfair. Because you're a libertarian, I wouldn't have you on my network if you weren't a libertarian because you don't believe in the use of government force. You just care about issues that the Mises Caucus doesn't. And I'll just say, I'm not saying the Mises Caucus, but a lot of people within that wing of the movement are the McCarthyites in a lot of ways. I mean, how do you look at that? How do you interpret that? And how do you sort of process it yourself as somebody who is on their blacklist?
Yeah, I don't know. It's silly to me because I have a pretty broad definition of libertarian. I think if I don't think it has anything to do with like the non-aggression principle or economic beliefs necessarily, anything. I think I'd say even just on net, like if you want to decrease overall government more than you want to increase it, I think you should be considered a libertarian, I mean, that gets, because it's like, oh, I'm like 51% for decreasing government. It's like, well, that's kind of iffy, but
right.
in general, that's how I view it. So I think the whole idea of especially when libertarians are already such a small camp wanting to run out people who like from the party or from the label even, who call themselves libertarians, trying to decrease that number even more is just kind of silly. But at the same time, because I think libertarian is such a vague, big tent word, it also doesn't always have as much meaning as I should, and there is a lot of confusion because obviously, like, somebody in the Mises caucus they're all libertarians, but they're worlds different than somebody in the LibSoc caucus or even somebody in like the pragmatic caucus. So I think it's important to recognize those distinctions, but like you said, just like this like mean-spirited McCarthyism, I think, is definitely counterproductive. And if you want to be against other libertarians so bad, it's like, why don't you just join the Republican or Democrat Party? But
I'm not like, you and I disagree on a lot of stuff. A lot of times it feels like, and that's not a sign of me not liking you. Don't take it that way. I'm just like to needle. But I also like the foil. Like, I like the conversation. Like, I like that Reinhold and I disagree on so much, but agree on so much, and that's a big reason why he's on more, is because he is somebody that I want him to challenge me, and I want to challenge them. I think, like, our conversation today is me challenging you and you going, here's why I believe what I believe, and then you walk away and maybe you go, I don't know about my answer there, I have to go back that up, or you had well thought out answers to my challenges today, and that makes me go, okay, this person knows what they're talking about, they're informed, they're not just shouting talking points at me, or and that'll make me go, that guy really is smart and I care about these things, but I hadn't thought about caring about this thing, and so maybe I ought to think about that more, because of being more of a right libertarian and you a left libertarian. It makes me go, having you on the network has made me go, I think, like, I've never heard of the concept of eliminating prisons, so go and read about that and talk about that. It makes one intellectually stronger. And likewise, you walk away from today and go, that Bezos answer or this answer or that answer, like, I wonder, let me go do more research, let me think about that through more, I hadn't thought about it like that, or I hadn't X, Y, and Z. It's a friendly conversation where you and I are learning from each other from opposing viewpoints. That is a much more powerful way to convert someone to your way of thinking, when it's friendly and conversational and you're not trying to kick some. I'm not going, you, Ryan, I'm closing down WAL Reader if you don't stop saying X, Y, and Z. If you don't stop praising it. I have said to you, I'm like, hey, listen, man, like, tone down the AOC just a little bit, because in the group, I don't want to like run too many people off. So, because it was like pretty frequent. Now, that's the closest. Agree with me now. That's the closest I've ever come to saying to you, like, hey, dude, because I want you to say what you want to say. I want you to challenge people like John Ulrich, because there's a lot of people watching those conversations going, all right, point that guy, point this guy. But there shouldn't be this thing where you go, this guy said something nice about AOC, I'm kicking him off the network.
Yeah.
That's just going to push you further away from ever hearing anything I have to say, and vice versa. So I don't get the tactic at all, because I'm sure you look at somebody like a Joshua Smith and go, I could care less what that guy ever has to say about anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and to be fair, I'm not like involved in like the Libertarian Party, like the minutia of that at all. Never really have been. And I don't want to be, frankly, based on what I've seen. But
perfect, you're on the right track. You're learning. No, you're learning from WAL and walking away from that.
Yeah, I'm just like, at this point, like, yeah, sure, give the nomination to Vermin. I don't care. But so yeah, I think, I don't know. I just don't really care for. I think discussing ideas and making allies and friends where we can is way more important than like party politics or electoral politics or any of that. Especially like, I think Trump is the perfect example of this. He got into, if you don't have like that establishment connection whenever you get elected to something, whether it's president or mayor or whatever, your entire administration is just going to be ran by like the technocrats who are already there. So It's like, what's the point in trying to win elections, really?
Perfect. Well, shameless self-promotion time. Is there anything that you've been around WAL for a while? I've wrongly, not intentionally, but it just hasn't worked out for whatever reason. I haven't had you on the show. You've been around for a while. Like, it's your time to just speak to the people. The floor is yours. Self-promote. Is there something where you're just like, man, I gotta say this. I want people to hear it.
Man, I'm trying to think. Whew, you put me on the spot.
I know.
Yes. Well, like we've already said, WALReader.com. You can check out our 3 issues there, all that content. I think there's a piece I wrote for the 2nd issue that is probably the favorite one that I've worked on so far. It's all about the death penalty and my reasoning for why the death penalty should be abolished. And I'm pretty proud of that piece. And it also touches on, we didn't really have time this morning to get to it, but it touches on some of my like Christian pacifist beliefs and gets into that. So I would ask that, I'd highly recommend go check out walreader.com and then ask if you wanted to check out that article about the death penalty. Like I said, it's in issue 2. It was titled, Is This Justice? I believe was the title. So yeah, go check that out.
Let's talk about the pacifism, because I forgot about that.
Okay.
And thank you for reminding me. Let's take a couple minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. We don't have time constraints. I'm just trying to be respectful of your time. But a lot of people call themselves a pacifist, and I may have used that term for myself in the past, because you want to be a pacifist as a Christian. You want to go that far. Mm-hmm. But you really are a pacifist. You're the only libertarian pacifist that I actually know.
Wow.
And so what does that look like? What does that mean for you?
Yeah. Just basically comes down to all life is precious. And regardless of what people do with their lives or, what even like the most heinous actions they might commit, they're still a human being, and they're precious to Jesus. So as a Christian, they should be precious to me too. And I just think and also, it's the idea of the ends justify the means. Like, if I'm in danger from somebody else, obviously, like, the end of trying to preserve my life, that's a good thing. I should try to preserve my life. But if the means to do that involve, taking the life of somebody else, which I think is in a way saying that their life is less precious than mine, then I think that's wrong.
So somebody breaks into your house and comes to attack you. Do you not fight back? I mean, what that means? Like,
well, I don't think anybody can fully 100% certainly answer that question, regardless of if they're a pacifist or not. But
sure.
What I would hope to do is, I think it doesn't mean passivity. Like, I think a great alternative is, there's all sorts of non-lethal things, pepper spray, for example, or hornet spray if you're a redneck in Missouri and don't want to buy pepper spray.
Wasp spray has been recommended to me so much lately.
It shoots out way further. It's stronger. Like,
it's got like jet fuel
sense.
Or something. Yeah.
So I don't want to say like, well, I think ideally nobody would ever hurt anyone. But if there's a choice between, like breaking somebody's arm or having yourself be killed, I think obviously, break the arm. If that's what you have to do.
So it doesn't necessarily, on a personal level, mean not fighting back, but on a global level, it certainly does. Like if somebody Is, in your opinion, an attack by another nation on the United States, do we not have license to then go to war against them, or how do you reconcile that with war?
Right. So I say that I subscribe to just war theory. The only problem is that no war is actually just. So, because war, especially in the modern sense, really ever since World War I, World War II, I'd say, war is inherently going to involve the death of civilians. There's just no way to avoid it, especially now with like this asymmetric warfare where it's like nation state against non-nation state and all that stuff. And, you've got weapons of mass destruction and bombs and everything involved. It's just impossible to avoid the death of civilians in war. If it was just like the actual soldiers fighting and dying, like that alone would be a tragedy. But I think you could make more of a case for justifying that. But like whenever 9/11 happened and 3,000 Americans died, we responded by, if we had just went and, bombed the Taliban camps, whatever, and only the Taliban had died, it's like, okay, maybe we can justify that. But I don't think you can't say that military action isn't going to kill civilians. And because of that, I don't think it can ever be justified. I don't think the loss of any innocent life is worth any sort of military or political goal.
So maybe a way to interpret it and tell me if this is fair is that even though our nation has lost lives, it doesn't mean that it's worth their. So it's almost you're weighting the lives of the innocent above the restitution, the justice of it, because to fight one injustice would to commit another injustice.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought justice up, and definitely, I think that's I agree with that. Yeah, the lives of the innocent are more important than a sense of justice or restitution. But I think that gets into what really is justice. Like and this, I touch on this in my death penalty article too. But if somebody murders somebody else and then we kill that murderer, like in a sense, that's like a shallow justice, I guess. But I think justice is less about punishment and retribution and much more about restitution, making things whole. So 9/11, they attacked us, and we can get a cheap, shallow justice by taking out the people that attacked New York. But a deeper, more meaningful justice is like we have to actually look at like why did they attack us, and like and obviously there's a ton of like influences on that, like why they did what they did, and look at our part. It's like what can we do different to prevent this in the future, or even it's like, yeah, these people helped attack us, but we 10 years ago we bombed their entire family over in Kenya. So it's like so I think real justice is you have to look at the big picture, and it's an exhausting process, but it forces you to get creative and looking at how can we, because I think real justice, nobody has to die for real deep justice to happen. So it's like, how can we make this right, or work at least towards making things right and whole with everyone involved in the situation, and that includes the victims and the perpetrators, because I think most of the time people that hurt people are just people who were hurt themselves earlier. So if you're not making things whole with everybody, then it's not real justice.
Well, that's a great place to stop, and that was a fascinating conversation, and I thank you so much for joining me. And I hope people learned a lot, and I hope that, listen, next time you run into a left libertarian, know that they're very thoughtful and very intelligent like Ryan. They're not the devil, okay, people? They're not. Have a conversation with them. Don't just try and rant them out of the movement, because that was a fascinating conversation, and I thank you so much, Ryan. I thank you for everything you do for We Are Libertarians, and I hope that people will go buy WAL Reader, support his work, and I greatly appreciate everything that you do.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
All right, we will talk to you next week.